sense bra was an attempt to automate a lot of that by recording how much is pumped or expressed during a breastfeeding or pumping session, and then also have some extra features about what they might be able to expect, and that's where some of those regressions and stuff come into play. So this basically just kind of outlines the main thing that I was kind of focused on, which was basically that there is a couple of papers that show that there's a near linear relationship between a change in breast volume and the milk that is expressed. And so there's a couple of these papers use either optical methods of measuring breast volume, but that change in the volume of milk that is expressed is almost 1. In this paper it's 1.1, but it's almost 1-to-1 with the change in volume. And so the idea is being, if you can measure or estimate what the change in volume is with a wearable device, you might be able to estimate how much milk was expressed, whether from a breast pumping session. And so that's come talked about a little bit more in detail on the CODA board. So that's one of the reasons why we went with the embedded strain sensors, to try to estimate if there was estimate what the volume was, or at least the change in volume of the breast. So this is just one of the older looks like models of what we were hoping for. And then sorry, Harlow's coming to you. Barking at something outside. And basically that we found a flexible strain gauge from liquid wire that would be able to be kind of embedded into the sensor. And from benchtop testing with the liquid wire sensors, we found out that they're probably good candidates. There's 0% drift over 10 minutes, and then there's less than 10% or less than 5% measurement error for those sensors. And then the next 3 slides are kind of for the development of the milk sense bra, just proposed studies, or there's write-ups of each one of these studies, each one of these proposals with links to it, but basically why it's important, what kind of things would be done in the methods section, and the kind of data that we might expect from it, and why it's important and that sort of stuff.
Perfect.
And so, like, the first one that we were talking about was validating the sensor accuracy on the mannequin by placing those strain gauges directly on the synthetic breast on the mannequin model, inflating and deflating the that's behind it, with the idea of hopefully we can show proof of concept that we can relate a change in strain to the amount of to the change in breast volume. Or the liquid that is expressed, quote unquote. So that would be kind of a proof of concept with the strain gauges directly on the mannequin. The next one that we were kind of talking about was how to determine like where the best placement of the strain gauges were and introduce the actual bra. And so we were kind of outlining where might be some good candidates or different designs for these strain gauges to try to test out, what is the optimal location. Again, there's another write-up, or that link, that proposed study 2 link will kind of direct you to another write-up with more detail. But this also introduces the massage bra, which means that there's going to be some error that's involved. And so this protocol might allow us to see not only what is the best way to put the sensors on the bra, but then also to see how much error the fabric of the bra and everything else might add to the system.
Sorry, you said this introduces the massage bra, or just like a bra?
Because this one is just directly on placing the strain gauges directly on the synthetic breast.
Yeah. No, so and the next one is with a bra, not the massage bra, right?
Sorry,
like the nursing bra.
Yes, milk sense. Sorry, I've been saying massage bra for a while, haven't I?
Okay, no, I understood.
Okay,
We're on
my
the same page. Yeah.
apologies. Thank you. I'm gonna get mixed up on products here.
Bless you.
Okay, yes. So this one would be using the milk sense bra and the fabric
Yeah.
that's on there.
Yeah.
Because basically by placing the strain gauges on the fabric, we're going to be introducing some error, because if the synthetic breast is increasing and decreasing in volume, since the strain gauge is not directly on the synthetic breast and it's on the bra, there's likely going to be some error that occurs between those two surfaces that the strain gauge has difficulty picking up. So this would just be kind of a proof of concept to see like how much error would be involved in that, as well as what orientations and locations would be best for the massage bra moving forward.
Yeah.
And then this one is again, it's the proposed study. This was one of the first ones that we were taking a look at, but all this stuff right now that we've been working on has been a change in breast volume. So even if the device is not capable of measuring true breast volume, there's still a lot that can be gained from measuring the change in breast volume. And so this was a proposal to see if there could be some regressions that could be developed so that we can measure true breast volume, which would might be able to add some more features. But this requires a lot more
involved
time. Right? Yeah,
participation.
users need to come in. We would need to take breast volume measurements by hand or optically with like a 3D scanner or something like that.
Yeah.
But this would be like one proof of concept is established, and we can measure the change in breast volume. This would be a next step of like, hey, can we measure true breast volume? Because if we can, then it opens up a lot more doors for, could this be a clinical product? Could we offer new features on the app, such as fullness and capacity of the breast and that sort of thing. So all three of those kind of proposed studies with write-ups are linked at the top with more in-depth background significance and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then as far as future stuff, developing a regression. So this is the main stuff that I was working on, was developing that regression to estimate how much daily volume a mom should expect to express over time. And hopefully the idea is that a new mom can log into the app, put in a bunch of personal information, and get an estimate of what they would expect over time. And then as they continue to record sessions and pump, that model would be updated so that they would know maybe how much they can expect for the next week or the next 2 weeks, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So that's where this particular graph and model come in. Basically, it's that daily breast milk volume follows that a kind of logarithmic function, which is usually characterized by this particular curve. So if there is days since birth on the x-axis, and then this has breast milk intake because they also measured what the infants were intaking, but it's breast milk expressed. It's characterized by a rapid increase in milk production immediately after birth, some sort of plateau period for a significant amount of time, kind of is up to the mom and their scheduling. But then there's some sort of gradual decline over time as milk production begins to decrease. And so this particular paper, Rios, Lebrez, and Yao describe it with this logarithmic function, which is that there are the only input is days since birth, but there is a linear portion to this function and a logarithmic portion to the function, and then there is a oops, I don't know why that's in there. BY, B3, there. And then there's some sort of model intercept. So the model intercept I've played around with, but I've kind of found out that when you try to apply this model to each individual, you can generate. Well, let me back up. I'll just continue here, and I'll come back to that model intercept. But these are the kind of steps that I was taking for seeing what we can do with this function. Basically, the idea was to create a database of longitudinal data of over 100 days for each like a mom contributes data that is more than 100 days worth of data. The reason for 100 days is because if they are not contributing consistent data over time, it gets really, really hard to estimate this model. So if they only give 30 days worth of data, it's just trying to fit this particular logarithmic model to that data is really, really hard. But the idea was collect a fair amount of longitudinal data, as well as some de-identified information on the infant mother and the household. This is described quite a bit more in the CODA board and the codes that are on GitHub.
I was just going to say, I think between slide 14 and 15, I think the one additional information I would love to have is how, even maybe in slide 14, talk about B1, B2, and basically just saying that this information is how you get B1 and B2 coefficients, right?
Yeah, so that's where this step 3 is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea is that a mom gives us her pumping data. So there's these 9 examples over here, and we can try to fit that logarithmic function to each person. So you can kind of, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but there is a kind of a purple fit line for that function for each mom. And so what this will do is for each mom, it will generate those logarithmic coefficients, B1, B2, B3. And the hope, and so what I've done with those coefficients is I've added it to their personal data. And the hope is that when we get enough moms with enough longitudinal data and coefficients, we can take their personal de-identified information and then try to relate that de-identified information and the baby information, all that stuff, to those coefficients. So the idea being, a new mom comes to the app and says, "I'm a single mom. I have 1 kid. I gave birth. The delivery method was a C-section. The baby was this size, this weight. I am this old." Like all those kind of just characteristic data describing the mom, the baby, and the household. And then a machine learning model would relate all that personal information to generate and estimate what these coefficients are. And so even before pumping, a new mom would come up and say like, "Oh, hey, these are all my characteristics. This is what I can expect to output over time for the next like 1 to 2 weeks." So without any pumping information, we could be able to give them an estimate. Probably, we don't know how accurate it is just yet. We don't have enough people. But that's the idea is new mom with no pumping information. We can say, here's an estimate of what you might expect to get on as like a daily sum from all your pumping. And then this step is kind of in the future, but the hope is that as the mom uses Lilu's app and records their pumping sessions, we might be able to update these coefficients as time progresses so that the model is more and more accurate and it takes into account what they've previously pumped. So for example, if this mom is totally new and she puts in all her data and it spits out this purple line, she says, "Great," and then starts pumping, doing her thing. And let's say that she pumps like way up here so that it's no longer it's well past this prediction. Ideally, we could take all that data that she's pumped up here and then update this model so that's more accurate as time goes on. That's kind of the plan.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So on the CODA board, this is this particular project. Each of these steps kind of outline the codes and what's happening in those codes to generate these graphs and generate these coefficients. And then those coefficients are saved into a file that is on the Google Drive with all that information. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so it adds a little bit more information about like what type of information I was hoping to collect and all those sorts of things of what might go into generating what these coefficients are for each person. Does that make sense? Did I lose you guys?
No, yeah, no, this makes sense.
Okay. So the other thing that it's more outlined here, it's not really in the notes, it's not really in the notes because it's more outlined here, is some of the issues that will inevitably come up. So for example, we have about 90 moms so far. But that is not enough, especially because these 9 individuals are really the only ones who provided that longitudinal data. So some moms, like it's just from data we've collected all over as best we can, and especially when we're dealing with donated data. Some moms might provide 15 days worth of data. Others might provide 200 days worth of data. The more data that we have, the more longitudinal data that we have for a mom, a lot easier it is to fit that model, and that model can be more accurate. So you can imagine if a mom gave 30 days worth of data somewhere out on the 100 to 200, days since birth, that's really hard to get an accurate coefficient for her.
Yeah.
And to know that sort of thing. So the more moms that we have, the better. Just in general. Right now, and I've outlined this in the code, but basically the code kind of is using these 9 as the examples because these 9 are the ones that provided the most data. That's all written out in the code and why I selected these ones and whatnot. And so that kind of carries into incomplete versus complete data sets. So for the most part, I've still kept all the data together. I'm saying incomplete as people who have not provided longitudinal data. It's still useful for descriptive metrics. Like if you wanted to kind of mine the database for, what is the average pump or average volume expressed at this date, for mother since days since birth. It's still useful for descriptive metrics, even if it's not useful for model building. So the incomplete data is still in there, and then the codes that select which data is viable, it's commented in the GitHub code and stuff. I don't know if that made sense. Realize that just sounds like a lot of gibberish.
No, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, no, on the same page. Yeah.
And then in addition, this is where the longitudinal stuff and where the longitudinal data is important, and when the time or like the window that the mom has given us. So for example, this particular mom on the top left gave us longitudinal data well over 300 days since birth, and this is the kind of data that we really want. Because what I was finding is that by having the data since birth, that just makes this model really easy to fit. We know with pretty high degree of accuracy where that rise is, where the plateau is, and the decay. So this would be like the ideal data set. For some moms who give a bit less, it becomes harder for that model to fit. And so one of the things that I've found, at least with these individuals, is that by setting this intercept to be 0, and saying that the mom doesn't produce any volume or produce milk before the baby is born, basically the day that the baby is born, that's where that's where the mom will start at.
Yeah.
By setting this one to 0, those models fit a lot better. They're a lot more generalizable. Otherwise, if you don't fit those things to 0, that doesn't work at all.
So do you have graphs with the B3 set to 0 for the incomplete data set?
I have, so all the graphs are like this, like you can, like in the code, and I've commented in the code, it's like I forced the intercept to be 0, and here's why. So you can always turn that off and mark it as like, mark it as like fit freely, and it will revert all the graphs.
So these that you're showing us have been set to 0.
Intercepts have been set to 0. Otherwise, like for this individual, the intercept might be, this might be a much flatter line. With the intercepts are around like 1,000, because it's just a lot easier to fit a flat line to this. But we know that it should be a logarithmic function, so that's why I set the intercept to 0 and then tried to fit the other coefficients.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine that with some moms who maybe they give 200 to 300 days, it's still 100 days worth, but it's out in this 200 to 300 window, and we have nothing between 0 and 200. By setting that intercept to 0, it's a lot easier to try to figure out where this kind of plateau region is. So all that to say, in an ideal world, everybody would give us data from the very beginning, so we don't have to worry about how accurate and trying to fit those models. If they give us data that is more outside that without the initial rise, it's possible. It just depends on how much data that they've given us, and that sort of thing. So for example, this one is a good example. They gave us 100 to 500 days, so we have a really good idea of what that decline is. By forcing the intercept to be 0, this model isn't showing it, but it will drop back down here. I just haven't visually displayed it here. Otherwise, if we don't fit that intercept to 0, this thing will be like somewhere way up here, and we can't know what those accurately what those coefficients are. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All that goes into this idea of collect longitudinal information, try to fit models for everybody, and grab those coefficients. And then for each person, also collect their de-identified information. And then that's what will help us develop this machine learning model that relates de-identified information to those coefficients.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So that's kind of this project in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any questions?
No, not me. I'm like I think this made sense to me right off the bat, so I'm good. Ragini, feel free to ask any questions that you may have.
Yeah, no questions. Maybe can we go over like the Python notebook for this? Just
Sure.
go through that. Yeah.
Sure. Give me one sec. I'm just bringing up the Jupyter notebooks and stuff. Okay, so while this is loading on my screen here, the other things, and this is things to kind of keep in mind. This approach at the moment with the data that we have will not take into account major factors, such as moms returning to work. So you can imagine if this mom returned to work around day 200, we could probably expect almost like a stepwise drop
Yeah.
Just because of time and availability and things like that. So this assumes that the mom is able to continue pumping and all that sort of stuff without interruption, or at least that if she did return back to work, then maybe this decline becomes a little bit more rapid, and that sort of thing. So we don't have a way of short of getting more and more data, asking moms when they return to work and trying to correlate like return to work and that sort of thing. We don't know what the effect is of like, if a mom returns to work, how does this affect this sort of thing? We can guess, but at the moment, this is a very, very basic and rudimentary. And once these initial models are developed, then you can probably start adding more advanced features into it of like what happens when the mom returns to work, or what happens when she's traveling and that sort of stuff. Okay, let me bring up stuff here. Okay, so in the GitHub, since this is all in the on GitHub as well.
Yeah.
But and then how things are organized within that GitHub. So all the stuff that I've been working on is kind of notebooks, clean and explore. Models is for, I was kind of playing around with different machine learning models. There's not much data to really go along with it. This is just kind of stuff that I was playing around with. So the main things is in this clean and explore, and then there's this like pipeline of things to run kind of in order. So for example, this particular file would be, this could be run to reformat, like as data comes in, it'll probably come in from different sources. So everything from the Lilu's app to, what is it, like Glow Baby and Pump Log OS, and all these different apps have different formats of pump logs.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that you can run this to reformat data into one cohesive format that you can use later on. So it starts with self-reported data. This might be for moms who have their own system, like they gave us their own spreadsheet. It wasn't on an app, or maybe it was by hand and I digitized it. And it gives a description of what the mom did, which file is, what data is in what column, all that sort of stuff. And then this code will take care of each of that. So if there's a new mom, there will need to be a new code for that mom specifically. Like, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And then it tells you where it was saved to.
Sure. Yeah.
This particular one will reformat app data. So I wrote functions for different apps. So the baby tracker app, Glow Baby, Huckleberry, iOS Pump Log, Nara Pumping Work. And so how things are organized is on the GitHub and in the Google Drive. They should be mirrored. Is that there is a data folder, and then there is a couple folders here. Census is basically it's general census data that I've pulled by zip code. This is just for if I wanted to kind of explore with building models. External data is where all this stuff is stored. It's on the Google Drive, but copies can be stored here. External has things from the Baby Tracker app, Glow Baby, Huckleberry app, that sort of stuff. So if you get a new mom they're like, I used Huckleberry, you should be able to grab their exported data and just chuck it in this Huckleberry app, assuming that the Huckleberry didn't alter their versions and their formats and stuff like that. So it's a big assumption.
Yeah.
But ideally, you should be able to chuck it in here and then just click run on this thing, and it should start parsing out and reformatting data into one data format. Does that work? Did I lose you guys? Okay.
No, makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just thinking through. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is just a pipeline of how when people donate data, how can we get them into like a singular format,
Yeah.
Use that singular format to generate models for each mom.
Yeah. I'm
So
thinking like surely there's a Python code that we can write depending on like we just basically add an extra variable and say this was from this app, and then it will execute the specific almost like a what do you call those files, like where you just execute, like take command line arguments and then you execute the specific file based on that.
I'm sure there is. I'm not like the savvy programmer, so this is my kind of research hack way a little bit of doing it. So
no, absolutely. No, this is super helpful already. I think like again, I think having these individually is super helpful, because then you can just basically give those command line arguments, and then it's called a make file. So you just have a make file that's that's basically taking into our consideration the command line arguments, and then it's executing specific .app based on like which application it's downloaded from.
Sure. If you guys bring in someone who's a lot more professional about this and knows what they're doing, they can take all this code and do with it
absolutely
as they will. I don't have those capabilities.
No, sure.
All these kind of all these functions and stuff are stored in this utilities folder. So if someone wants to go and see what's actually going on, they can look for, it's organized by reformatting functions and comments that describe what each code chunk is doing. Utility functions for if I need to, these are just things that functions I end up using over and over and over again, all the way to the data privacy functions that I was using. So how I generated unique user IDs for each person was basically running this code and that sort of thing. So yes, that's what these are. These are unique user IDs generated from that code. Basically takes the person's name, email, and birth date, generates a unique user ID. And then that way I can keep track of things with a little bit more privacy. So again, somebody who is a lot more professional at that would be able to do that so much more cleanly. Okay, any questions on this particular one?
Nope, not for me.
Okay, okay, and then it also grabs all the data that we have available, so that includes the Lilu's pump log studies and stuff like that, and reformat studies. So the next one kind of in the system is basically all this data gets saved to the interim folder. So in this data, there's external. This is where anything outside Lilu is stored. Anything inside Lilu, like Lilu's app and stuff, is stored in the. I guess I don't have it in there. It's on the Google Drive. External is for anything outside. Internal is for anything inside. Both those kind of get condensed once they're in the same format into this interim folder. So these are all different users, plus the massive amount of users from or massive amount of people in that pump log study. These all have the same file format. So column A is always unique user ID. Column B is always the date that they were pumping, like that sort of thing. So they're all consistent. What this will do is grab anything that's in this folder, merge it all into one, basically, and then start parsing out data into individual data sets. So things like it parses all those into the people who breastfeed, not pumping, but directly breastfeeding. So we have a limited data. We don't have volume for them. So breastfeeding by day or breastfeeding by session, pumping by day, pumping by session, or combined expression being breastfeeding and pumping by day, by session, that sort of stuff. So that's what this stuff does, is it takes all that unique or all that data from the interim folder, shoves it into one data set, parses out the data sets into a couple of just basic different things. That way, if you guys wanted to look at stuff without having to kind of hunt through or sort through stuff, you can do that, and that's in the processed folder.
Cool. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
The next one, this for me, this is more of exploring that interim data. And so this is me grabbing these files and saying, okay, of those data sets, can we get some descriptive metrics of what's in that data set, like how many moms, how many sessions per mom, that sort of thing. And so this would be like a good idea of in the, let me see. Which one is this? This one is for the expression. So for the entire data set by session, for the entire data set by session, this is what our data looks like. So we have a fair amount of people that provide less than 100 counts of data. That's probably from that early Lilu uplog study where it wasn't for a long period of time. That's why.
Yeah.
As we started trying to generate data for this regression and stuff, we started asking for more and more data. That's where this stuff comes in. So this is the start to their unique user ID, how much data they provided both by day and then by session. And so we can see that, like, hey, this particular mom provided almost, more than 1,000 days of data in their entire data set. It's made up of over 4,000 individual sessions, and they roughly provided 3.2 sessions per day.
Okay. Yeah.
That sort of thing. So this just is me exploring what kind of data comes in. So including stuff of like specifically for breastfeeding or specifically for pumping sessions, that sort of stuff. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. This part is me trying to say, okay, I'm going to take this pumping data and extract out those individuals who provided a significant amount of longitudinal data, as by basically over 100 days of data.
Yeah.
That's where. Oops. That's these folks right here, the ones that. The ones that we've been kind of using as examples. So that's where I got them from. And then again, this is more of an exploratory thing, so it doesn't save anything just yet. But this explores creating those models by subject to fit the logarithmic function to each person and try to extract out what each person's coefficients are for that logarithmic model. So that's where this graph comes from. Does that one make sense?
Yeah. What did you mean by subject, by individual?
Yeah. So each graph here is an individual. So this is mom 1, mom 2, mom 3, that sort of thing. And so it'll fit a model to each mom individually. So for example, it'll look at this mom, it will split their data into training and test data. It'll fit this model and then tell me how accurate that model is. Basically, I'm looking just for any outliers and stuff. Or if anything of like, hey, this isn't a particularly good model, that sort of stuff. And then it moves to the next person, does the same thing, moves to the next person, does the same thing, that sort of stuff.
Okay. Cool.
And so each model should be specific to the mom. And this MAPE, mean average percent error, or wait, no, mean absolute percent error, that's what it is, just tells me how much error there is in this model. So this model has about 14% error. It's like, okay, it's fine, that sort of thing. This model over here has 44% error. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's this person right here.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, well, they didn't really give us a complete data set. We also don't see that characteristic rapid increase, plateau, and decline. So something may be going on with this person, even though they've provided 100 days of data. My guess is that this person may have done like mixed pumping and breastfeeding, and so the pumping does not describe their total expression. We don't have that data, that sort of thing. So that's the kind of stuff that I was like looking around for. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then this chunk will add those coefficients for each mom to their personal data. So if we go back to our data folder, There is a personal data file that has unique user IDs, where they're from, how they were recorded, if this was an internal ELU experiment, identifying information. Again, if you're getting into more security, you can deal with this. And then the personal information that they volunteered in either surveys or through email communication and things like that. So everything from when the mom was born, the mom's, oops, get rid of that, the mom's height and weight, their ethnicity, zip code if we want to pull census data, average household income if we think that this might be a factor into estimating what those coefficients are.
Yeah.
Childcare options, all that sort of stuff, into baby information. How long was the baby, how old was, how many gestational weeks had passed for the baby when they were born? Basically, are they term or preterm infants, that sort of stuff. How many children were born, that sort of stuff. And so for those moms that we do have a lot of data, it sticks in those B1 and B2 coefficients. And so the idea is once we get a lot of moms with a lot of data, we can start generating these coefficients for, I don't know, 100 moms or something like that. Yeah. And then we can take this data and say, okay, how do these things, how does ethnicity, race, household income, zip code, or blah, 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 which ones are factors in estimating these coefficients?
Would that be similar analysis to what we carried out just now with the pump, like with the pilot study that you just did, like looking at all the factors? Like what was the name of that? Like linear. What was the analysis that you did? Not here, but the recent one that you with the
linear mixed effects model.
Yes, linear mixed.
No, those would be different. So the linear mixed effects model, I probably wouldn't use. I suggested here maybe doing a decision regression tree.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
So and another data scientist might have a better idea. But basically, what we're hoping from here is a lot of these factors that they're a mix of data. So they're everything from numerical data that has order. 1.63 meters is shorter than 1.65 meters. Does the mom's height factor into what these coefficients are? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Does the baby's sex, female, male? This could be organized as categorical data as it is right now, or it could be converted into 0 and 1s for still numerical data. But what something like the decision regression tree does is it begins to kind of say, like, hey, does the mom make a lot of money? Yes, no. And then it says, like, if they make a lot of money, go down this route. If you guys have seen those kind of decision trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something like this. And so a decision, that's not a good example. Decision tree might say, like, is there some factor, like, does the mom work? Yes or no? And if yes, then they go down this way. Does the mom work full time? Yes, no, that sort of thing. And it starts separating data down into different decisions. And then by the end of it, you can say, like, if you get down all the way to the factors that are pertinent, and maybe you get down from salary, then you go through race and ethnicity, then it goes through baby delivery method or that sort of thing. The decision trees will figure out the order and how these things go and what's the best order. But by the end of it, it should state, like, okay, great. Given all this information, here for this person is how to use all this information and calculate these coefficients. Ultimately, this is the outcome of how well can all this data be used to predict these two things. Because what we're hoping for is that a new mom to Lilu system, when they sign in, they make a profile and they can input all this data. And even without seeing what their pumping logs look like, if they give us all this data and we know what parameters are important, we can say, okay, given all this data, we can estimate what these two coefficients are.
Okay.
And then without ever seeing the mom's pumping data, we can provide this line of best fit, this model, and say, hey, hi, new mom, based on your information, we would expect that your model might look something like this, where you can expect to pump 1,000 milliliters by day 100, or that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
And then mom says great. And then ideally, as they add in their own pumping data, we haven't gotten to this point yet, but the idea is that as they add in their own pumping data, those coefficients might be updated as the person adds in their data, and that model would be different. It would be another model after this decision regression tree. So there would be a couple of models underneath. So whoever is a data scientist afterwards could probably do that.
Okay.
So that's where all this stuff comes in, fitting those models, saving those coefficients to the data sets. Does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All this stuff afterwards is me exploring things to see if there's simple ways of predicting output. This is an output over time. This explorative linear model is me kind of playing around with different stuff of trying to use information to see if it is a simple way to explain daily output. Long story short, it's not. So that's kind of why it's just at the end. It's me kind of just doodling around with stuff.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So that's kind of where it stops. This is base code. This was another thing of how I was developing stuff. It's all the same things that this particular one does. So
Okay, makes sense.
exploring internal data. So this is just me exploring stuff, that sort of thing.
Cool.
And this is me making graphs for the grant review. So does that kind of make sense of what's in here?
Yes, very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. That's effectively the end of the milk sense stuff. If you guys had any questions on it.
No, I'm all set. I think that was really helpful. Walking us through.
Yeah, that was
everything.
super thorough. Thank you so much, Stephen. That
Okay.
was very, very thorough.
Yeah, and just feel free to interrupt me because if you guys have questions. As far as the massage bra and revisited data analysis, this is where that HTML file is. So this is kind of different. This is looking over old data that is for a different product.